Monday, 1:07 p.m. Hi, Mom. It is your son.
He was her only child.
Hey, I'm just wondering if you might have my dad's number.
She's held on to the recording to feel his company.
I would appreciate it. You can call me here. Thanks. Bye-bye.
It's the message he left a few days before his life came to a horrific end.
Mary literally collapsed on the floor and just screamed, "Oh no, oh no."
Mary Weiss believed her son, Dan Markinson, had a rage burning within. Her instincts proved to be true. Just before Mother's Day 2004, he grabbed a box cutter and violently slashed into his chest and neck, nearly decapitating himself.
He didn't pass away, they let him die. And they need to be held accountable.
This is Weiss a few years ago in a documentary film. She recently suffered a stroke and didn't feel up to an on-camera interview with the Fox 9 investigators.
Dan became ill and I got him into Fairview Riverside Hospital.
In the documentary, she told of her son's struggle with the onset of a mental illness.
It was obvious he was deteriorating.
How he was under a court order to follow the recommendations of his psychiatrist.
It's an obvious conflict of interest.
How that same University of Minnesota doctor was conducting a drug study for a pharmaceutical company, which was also paying part of his salary.
Dan had the choice of either going into the study or going into a mental hospital. He chose the study.
Weiss believes Dan was in no state of mind to understand what he was signing up for. And his condition, she says, only got worse once he started taking the study drug he was assigned.
We had tried for everyone to help us. Because Dan was of legal age, I had no way of getting him out of the study, other than pleading with the doctors to let him out, which they would not.
For months, Weiss sent letters, one by certified mail, and made phone calls to the university. These notes, taken by the drug study coordinator, show Weiss even left a voice message saying, "Do we have to wait until he kills himself or someone else before anyone does anything?"
He was psychotic.
3 weeks later, Dan's mutilated body was found in the bathroom of a group home.
I think at some point in time, the university needs to man up and say, we are going to hold ourselves accountable.
Mike Howard, a close friend, has stood with Weiss during her nearly decade-long battle with the U of M.
And I'd never come across a case this egregious.
They found an ally in Carl Elliott, a bioethics professor at the U with doctorate degrees in both medicine and philosophy. He's written books on the drug industry.
When the mother of a research subject is calling you repeatedly, warning you that she thinks her son is going to commit suicide, you don't simply ignore her.
The university maintains its care of Dan Markinson was appropriate, that there's no causal link between the drug study and his suicide. In fact, an investigation by the FDA found no evidence of misconduct on the U's part.
It's a very deeply flawed, even incompetent inspection report.
Elliott is critical of the FDA report in part because the inspector never interviewed Mary Weiss.
So the only side of the case that she got came from people at the University of Minnesota.
Weiss did file a lawsuit. A judge dismissed the case on the grounds that under state statute, the university was immune from being sued. The U turned around and filed a claim for Weiss to pay its $57,000 legal tab. It dropped the claim after Weiss agreed not to appeal the judge's ruling.
This is the deposition of Dr. Stephen Olson.
She did proceed with a malpractice suit against Dan's psychiatrist, Stephen Olson, also the lead investigator of the drug trial. It was settled out of court. The university would not allow us to interview Olson.
What do you think the university is hiding?
I think they're hiding things that were done fraudulently, things that were done sloppily, and they're trying to cover up.
Howard points to this report as ammunition. Last November, the State Board of Social Work issued an agreement for corrective action with Gene Kenny, a social worker who was the coordinator of the drug study Dan was in. The board found Kenny had dispensed medications without a license, signed off on medical charts using the initials of Dan's psychiatrist, and failed to adequately address family concerns that Dan was in danger of killing himself.
If you see these things going wrong with someone with a study coordinator, wouldn't you want to step back and say, who was watching her? Who was telling her to do these things?
Kenny told us she didn't do anything that was wrong or against the law. She said Mary Weiss was very controlling of Dan's situation. You don't just kick someone out of a study because the mother wants it to happen. Kenny said Dan was doing well, but added the guy had pretty many stressors going on. Mom was very much interfering with things. Kenny said the fact that Dan committed suicide near Mother's Day, quote, was a really strong message.
I went to the hospital, to the emergency room, with symptoms of a mental illness.
This man, who asked that we disguise his face and voice, was recruited for another study the U of M was paid to run for a pharmaceutical company.
I don't think I was competent to be making that decision. I wasn't on any medication at all, and I was experiencing really bad symptoms of mental illness.
He says he signed up because he felt if he didn't, he wouldn't get out of Riverside Hospital.
You know, when you're locked up in a place, you're very scared, and you're willing to do what anyone basically suggests.
He was put on an experimental drug for schizophrenia that was seeking FDA approval. He says it gave him severe headaches, blurred vision, and abdominal pain. So much pain that he says he thought of committing suicide. 3 months into the study, he called an ambulance to take him back to Riverside Hospital.
Instead of telling me to immediately stop taking the medication, they told me to cut the pills in half with a butter knife and continue taking them.
The principal investigator of the drug trial was Dr. Stephen Olson. He told us in an email that the patient did not report severe headaches or blurred vision to him. Olson says he did not tell the man to cut the study medication in half. The patient eventually dropped out of the study and went elsewhere to get help.
I'm doing a lot better since then.
The development of the test drug he was on was later terminated. It never did get FDA approval. This is the kind of case that troubles Dr. Elliott.
Or there are other subjects who are being put in danger.
Elliott writes a blog about the Markinson suicide and research ethics. He's been very critical of the university and wants an outside investigation. He's angered many, including his boss, the medical school dean, who wrote a scathing op-ed in the newspaper.
You've been knowingly putting out inaccurate information. You're selective and distorted in your narrative about the case. This is a tragedy, not a scandal.
It's a tragedy and a scandal.
Tensions on campus are high.
You don't come by here much anymore?
Not as often as I used to. It's gotten uncomfortable.
Elliott has moved out of his office in the Academic Health Center.
It's unpleasant. I mean, there's not much conversation. People are not getting along very well here.
Professor Lee Turner, another bioethicist at the U, supports Elliott's call for an investigation.
I'm in full agreement with his critique. I think that this is a major scandal for the University of Minnesota.
Internal university emails obtained by the Fox 9 investigators through the state's open records law show how contentious things are. In March, a writer from Scientific American contacted the school for a piece she was doing about the Markinson case.
I became more and more appalled at the errors and breaches in normal research conduct.
The university's senior director of communications sent out this internal message. I looked her up and can't tell if she's a wacko or not. I get nervous about anyone who would pay any attention to Carl.
I was shocked that the university's response to my inquiry was that I'm a wacko.
Dr. Judy Stone spent 25 years conducting clinical trials, even wrote a book about it. She says she started her reporting on Markinson with no interest on one side or the other. She has never met Carl Elliott.
They won't talk to me and have told other faculty also not to talk to me.
In October, a group of nearly 200 scholars from outside Minnesota sent a letter to the U of M Faculty Senate urging them to request a public inquiry of the Markinson case.
This is really a case that appears troubling to many specialists in the field.
We asked the university for an interview. Here's the response we got. We're not going to go on the record talking about this. To reiterate, this story is a decade old. We've told this story over and over again in the media, and there is nothing new.
is your son?
Mary Weiss is fighting to regain her health after suffering 2 strokes. There's a small pouch she wears around her neck, which carries some of her son's ashes. Mike Howard says the last 9 years have taken a tremendous toll on his good friend, but she's still determined to find someone be held accountable for Dan's death. So is Carl Elliott.
What's the toll been on you? Because you've been beat up a lot.
Hasn't been great, but I think compared to what Mary has gone through, I mean, I just don't think there's any comparison, really.
It was a shocking crime. 2 convenience store clerks shot dead in cold blood. The killer, a teenager who wore a smile during his murder trial.
And what's the link between that case and the University of Minnesota's Department of Psychiatry? Well, tonight Jeff Ballion continues our ongoing investigation of psych practices at the university with a stunning revelation.
This is the Michael Swanson we remember, laughing at a news photographer who tripped taking his picture.
No. What's so funny? You're smiling.
Y'all are funny.
It was chilling to see a 17-year-old boy arrested on murder charges acting so giddy. Even more chilling is the story you're about to hear.
These families in Iowa deserve better. We didn't deserve better. Michael deserved better. Nobody deserved this.
In November of 2010, Swanson stole a car, some guns, and ran away from his parents. After leaving the Twin Cities, he robbed 2 convenience stores in Iowa. At each one, he shot a clerk in the face. Both died.
I don't know if you ever get over it.
It was, his mother says, a completely preventable tragedy.
What I want to happen is I want the truth to come out. I think it's important that people know what really happened.
Weeks before Michael went on his killing spree, a psychiatrist wrote this warning. I am concerned that he poses a risk to society if unmedicated, and even if medicated, he is still somewhat unpredictable.
Why was this a secret document?
We begin our investigation with the police interview of Michael Swanson just hours after the killing.
When's the last time you slept?
Like 4 days ago.
4 days ago?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes I just can't sleep at all.
Okay.
Swanson tells the detective he's been hallucinating.
I was driving, and I just keep looking out the window because I thought there was someone right there.
Okay. Had that ever happened to you before?
And it happens like when I don't sleep.
That inability to sleep for long periods can be a symptom of someone who's bipolar. It's a brain disorder that causes dramatic, sometimes explosive shifts in a person's mood and energy level.
So you're not taking any medication right now? Did you go to a doctor and were you diagnosed with being bipolar at some point? When was that? Do you know?
Like a month ago.
Okay. So are you supposed to be on some medication?
They've been talking about it. They just don't want to make the jump right now.
Who was talking about it? Why didn't they put him on meds? A month earlier, Swanson was confined to the Hennepin County Home School, a correctional center for troubled teens. It was his last stop after years of disturbing behaviors that made him a familiar face to the juvenile justice system.
There's like 2 Mikes. There's my Mike, who is this nice, well-behaved young man. And then there's this other Mike, who you just don't know what he's going to do.
There was a period just before Michael went to the county home school when Kathy Swanson slept with a stick. She feared the other Mike was going to attack her in her sleep.
We had at times would find hammers, wrenches, knives in the house where we would wonder, is this kid thinking about killing us?
In fact, Michael had admitted previously to having thoughts of killing his mom and his aunt. The family had tried getting him help. He'd be hospitalized for a time, their insurance would run out, and he was released.
We didn't know what was going on with him.
In the summer of 2010, a judge ordered Swanson to spend up to 120 days at the county home school. It was punishment for stealing a car and causing a hit-and-run crash while drunk. Records show he behaved himself at the school, was scheduled to get out early, until staff discovered some bizarre writings in his room.
It's all about death and violence and darkness and blood.
Michael claimed they were just lyrics from rap music, but the staff was so concerned they ordered a psychiatric evaluation.
And to just be, writing and writing and writing and writing this weird crap tells you he was in a very weird state.
Dr. Jonathan Jensen from the University of Minnesota was under contract to provide psychiatric services for the school. Jensen summarized the evaluation findings in this report, which was never shown to the family until after Michael committed the murders in Iowa. He diagnosed Michael with bipolar affective disorder. Treatment with the drug Abilify might help prevent future mood swings. Jensen even wrote, "There's a real concern about his use of force. It would seem to me that likelihood of his repeating the theft of guns, robbery of people is probable, and that without antipsychotic medication, he may carry out these behaviors."
Was it your understanding that this Dr. Jensen was Mike's doctor?
Yes. Yes.
3 weeks after the evaluation, Dr. Jensen met with the Swansons and social worker Dan Lenher at the county homeschool. It was the Swansons' belief that the purpose of the meeting was to discuss their son's diagnosis, get him started on medication, and figure out a treatment plan. These notes from the social worker indicate he had the same expectations. But the Swansons say, to their surprise, Dr. Jensen did none of that.
He told me, I can't talk about that evaluation. I didn't do the evaluation.
According to the Swansons, Jensen said he couldn't prescribe medication for Michael because he didn't know anything about him. What he did, they say, was recommend their son be enrolled in a research clinic at the University of Minnesota. The Swansons have made these same claims in sworn depositions taken when they were sued by the families of the shooting victims.
He did not want to answer any of our questions.
After the meeting, Michael Swanson was released to move back home with his parents. There was no prescription, no meds for him to take. The family made an appointment at the university's clinic the next day. It would be 6 weeks before he could be seen. 12 days after leaving the county homeschool, and while his parents were sleeping, Michael stole his mother's Jeep and took off.
It says you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
The first time the Swansons saw Dr. Jensen's report was 4 months later when Michael's lawyer got a copy for his trial. Not until then, they say, were they aware that Dr. Jensen was concerned Michael was a risk to society if unmedicated.
Now, when you read that, what did you think?
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. How do you write that? And in that meeting, tell me you don't know anything about that kid? You don't know anything about him? But you can write that? And you let us take him home knowing we're afraid of him? Knowing this?
Was Dr. Jensen obligated to tell them his concerns?
There'd be no reason not to share that.
We showed the evaluation report to a former staff psychiatrist with the Juvenile Justice Mental Health Program in Los Angeles.
It does seem appropriate that if you had that level of concern about a child's dangerous and they're dangerous not being on medication, that at a minimum you would communicate that with the parents. So
why didn't Dr. Jensen tell his concerns to the Swansons? Why didn't he write a prescription right after Michael's psych evaluation? Remember, he remained in the homeschool for another 3 weeks before being released. And why did he want him enrolled in a research clinic at the university?
I believe that his role was to recruit patients for clinical trials.
She put that accusation in writing and sent it to the Hennepin County Attorney's Office asking for an investigation. She got a response that the alleged conduct does not appear to violate any felony law. The university told us there were no trials at that time for which Michael would have been eligible. A colleague of Jensen says the clinic was not seeking Swanson for a drug study, but offering him follow-up care. Michael and his parents signed a release allowing Dr. Jensen to discuss the case with us. "I will not talk with you," he replied in an email. We followed up with a list of questions and asked for a response in writing. We got a one-word answer: no.
I think the doctor should go to prison. I mean, her son is as good as dead to her.
The Swansons have the moral support of Mary Weiss, an outspoken critic of the University of Minnesota's Department of Psychiatry. Weiss sued the university after her mentally ill adult son killed himself while enrolled in a drug study there. She claimed doctors coerced her son into the study and then benefited financially. The case was dismissed on the grounds the university was immune from being sued.
She's helped me.
Swanson reached out to Weiss after Michael's arrest. She sat with her during the murder trial.
And I felt sorry for her. And this wasn't her doing.
Weiss is currently recovering from a second stroke. Hi.
Hi.
How you doing? Kathy Swanson is haunted by a number of unanswered questions.
Who knew what? What were they doing about it? And what happened?
She asked me to join her to review her son's juvenile corrections file.
I'm hoping there's some notes between Dan Lenher and the probation officer.
Dan Lenher, you'll recall, was Michael's social worker at the county homeschool. He sat in on the meeting between the Swansons and Dr. Jensen where they expected Michael to be put on Abilify.
I have a feeling Dan Lenher had to question why this kid wasn't taking this med. I questioned it.
She finds no answer in the file. Perhaps a meeting with Lenher himself will shed some light.
I'd like him to confirm what happened in that meeting that we had with Jensen.
She knocks on Lenher's door. He opens the blinds, looks her straight in the eyes, then closes them without saying a word.
I just have to feel that has to be driven by a lot of his own guilt. If he had nothing to hide and he felt like he did everything he could have, he'd talk and be open and honest.
Michael Swanson is serving a life sentence for murder. For the first time, he's getting treated for his mental illness. He's on multiple medications. A prison official says he's got a pretty firm grasp on reality. He's pretty stable. The nice Mike is the one who calls his parents several times a week to check in.
Well, I love you, sweetie. We'll talk to you later. Okay. Bye-bye.
We shared the results of our investigation with the families of the two women killed by Michael Swanson. The husband of Sheila Myers told us if a doctor had concerns about Swanson being a risk to society if unmedicated, why did they let him out of the county homeschool? And the sister of Vicki Bowman Hall called the information troubling. I just think there's been a failure somewhere. I'm Fox 9 investigator Jeff Ballion.
New allegations tonight involving drug research at the University of Minnesota. A man who was recruited for a clinical trial says he was misled about the possible dangers and suffered horribly because of it.
Now, an ex-governor is joining others who want an outside investigation of the U's human research programs. Fox 9 investigator Jeff Ballion has more.
I said, I'm done. I'm not taking these anymore because I thought I was going to die, you know.
All he wants is an apology.
Because what happened to me was really horrible.
But a former government regulator believes what happened to Robert is so disturbing, it warrants a federal investigation.
That whole picture is very troubling and reflects a failure to ensure that subjects are being adequately protected regarding this research.
Robert's story is part of an ongoing Fox 9 investigation into drug research by the University of Minnesota's Department of Psychiatry. Last fall, we reported on the case of Dan Markinson, who died after trying to cut his head off while enrolled in a drug trial. Robert says his experience in a different study nearly drove him to commit suicide.
They don't care what happens to the person. They care about the money from the drug companies.
Back in 2007, Robert developed ringing in his ears, started hearing voices, was feeling anxious. He feared it was a brain tumor and went to the emergency room. He was transferred to the psych unit at Fairview Riverside Hospital, where he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. That's where he was approached by U of M researchers.
Immediately, they were on me to do experimental medication that's not FDA approved. And I have never been on medication in my life.
Robert says he felt coerced to enroll in a trial for an experimental drug called bifeprinox.
Then they say, you have a giant medical bill. And if you do the research study, you won't have this giant medical bill.
He says he was worried about the safety of bifeprinox since it did not have FDA approval.
He told me the drug was safe, and he told me that it was going to be the next treatment for schizophrenia, and everyone was going to be taking it.
Robert gave the U permission to release his medical files to the Fox 9 investigators. Dr. Stephen Olson was in charge of the trial. Part of his salary was paid for by the drug's maker, Solvay Pharmaceuticals. Olson wrote in the clinical record that Robert was very interested in the opportunity to have his medical expenses covered by the study because he had no insurance. He also noted Robert did have concerns about the drug's safety. Although initially leery of the bifeprinox study, as was experimental medication, he was reassured that enough patients have been treated to be more sure of its safety.
That is inappropriate. It minimizes the risk, and that was the very reason this trial was being done, to try to find out, indeed, if the drug is safe.
Dr. Michael Carome is a physician who previously worked for the federal government's Office of Human Research Protection. He helped develop and write the regulations that are supposed to guard research subjects from abuse. He's now on staff with the watchdog group Public Citizen.
One should have provided no assurances that the drug is safe.
We asked Dr. Carome to review Robert's records.
It really is understating the risks.
We now know in hindsight there were significant risks with this drug. Just weeks after Robert enrolled in the study, the FDA rejected bifeprinox for approval. Within months, the drug maker halted all research after the medication was linked to the death of a study subject in Europe who suffered liver failure.
And I was incompetent, and I didn't know what I was doing.
Robert can't recall if university researchers ever told him about those developments. There was no written notification we could find in his file about the FDA denying approval of the drug. He did sign a consent form when he first enrolled in the study. There was a line in that about a death in another bifeprinox study related to liver abnormality.
And the way the language read in the consent form downplayed that risk inappropriately.
I should have been taken out of the study right away when I had these pains.
Records show while Robert was in the trial, he complained of having abdominal pain. 3 times he went to the emergency room, once by ambulance. One ER doc suspected the pain might be related to the experimental drug.
In fact, abdominal discomfort and constipation were listed as possible side effects of bifeprinox. Dr. Olson, the study investigator, made note of Robert's complaints and reported them to the drug company. But documents show he listed their connection to bifeprinox as unlikely.
The presumption should have been that those were due to the drug unless proven otherwise.
3 months into the study, Robert said the pain was so bad that he was having thoughts of suicide and decided to drop out of the research. Here's what Dr. Olson wrote about that. He decided to quit the study due to these psychosomatic side effects. Dr. Carome finds it troubling that Olson discounted the possibility the drug was responsible for Robert's symptoms.
That's really not in the best interest of the human subjects, whereas it might be in the best interest of the sponsor who hopes someday to get this drug approved by the FDA.
Dr. Olson declined to be interviewed by the Fox 9 investigators. He has not responded to our questions about what he told Robert early on about the drug's safety, or why he determined the side effects Robert was having were psychosomatic.
In a statement to Fox 9, Olson called into question Robert's ability to recall what really happened in 2007. His medical record shows extreme anxiety and paranoia, a history of head injuries, and lengthy battle with alcoholism. It is highly inappropriate for him to be put in the media spotlight as a spokesperson for clinical trial safety. After Robert left the study, he sought conventional treatment for his illness and is doing well.
People are more important than research, and they don't seem to understand that.
His vulnerability at the time of his recruitment is exactly what concerns experts like Dr. Carome and others.
Then they proceeded to tell her exactly how he died, and it was in a horrific suicide.
This month marks the 10th anniversary of the suicide death of Dan Markinson, a research subject in another drug trial run by Dr. Olson. Markinson's family accuses university researchers of coercing Dan to enroll in the study and then ignoring their pleas to have him removed because they feared he was in danger of killing himself or someone else. An FDA investigation cleared the U of any wrongdoing, but a group of 170 scholars worldwide wants the case reopened and the U's human research practices scrutinized by independent experts.
My concern is that there's widespread abuse of psychiatric research trials, that this isn't an isolated case, that there are more deaths like this.
Some medical students at the U want an outside investigation as well. They recently staged a protest at the Board of Regents meeting.
I want to see some justice done on this.
Former Governor Arnie Carlson contacted the Fox 9 investigators after seeing our coverage of the research controversy.
Well, I'm going to continue to press.
He has since written letters to the university's president, the Board of Regents, and Governor Dayton, urging them to do something.
I can't get a solid answer on how many people, have been victimized by this. What does that tell us? It tells us that secrecy runs rampant at a time when we need openness.
Carlson says nothing short of an independent, very public review of what's going on in the university's psych research department will do. The U has declined our request to be interviewed about either the Markinson case or Roberts. They tell us an internal investigation of Roberts' complaints is currently underway.
Like I told the people in my group therapy, they said, this sounds like some horror story out of the 1950s. You know, they couldn't believe it happened in this present day.
I'm Fox 9 investigator Jeff Ballion.
A major new development related to an ongoing Fox 9 investigation tonight.
The Legislative Auditor's Office is now going to conduct its own probe of the University of Minnesota's psychiatric drug research programs.
And this comes after a series of reports from the Fox 9 investigators. Here's Jeff Ballion with the very latest.
Our most recent story prompted some state lawmakers to send this letter to Legislative Auditor Jim Nobles asking him to take action. We believe it is important to know how many subjects have died or been seriously injured in psychiatric research studies undertaken at the university.
I think partly because of some of the reporting that you've been doing, there has been heightened concern about what has happened at the university and the lack of openness by the university about what has happened.
Nobles will launch an investigation that looks at the past 10 years of drug trials conducted by the university's psych department. That includes the case of Dan Markinson, a research subject who died trying to decapitate himself. And also this man who says he suffered serious side effects after being coerced to take part in a study for an experimental drug to treat schizophrenia.
And then they say, you have a giant medical bill. And if you do the research study, you won't have this giant medical bill.
Noble says his office will try to determine if any deaths or injuries can be linked to the U's research. He will also review how people were recruited and whether or not doctors committed ethical lapses after accepting money from drug companies to do the studies.
And I want to do it in a very responsible, appropriate, thoughtful way. I don't want this to just continue and linger.
Former Governor Arnie Carlson has followed our reporting and taken a personal interest in the research controversy. Today, he met with University President Eric Kaler to try and get some answers.
And you have victims in this. You have real victims in this. And your channel has pointed that out.
Kaler would not allow the Fox 9 investigators into the meeting and refused to speak with us afterwards. Carlson and Kaler were behind closed doors for an hour.
I think we're making progress. It's a bit slow, but I think it's going to work out.
Critics of the university, including some of its own professors, hope the legislative auditor's investigation will finally reveal what, if any, secrets the university's been keeping from the public.
I think it's a very progressive development, and I'm looking forward to the outcome.
I'm Fox 9 investigator Jeff Ballion.